Welcome to Audiobook. Today we present Secrets in the Snow by Jefferson Farjeon, a classic mystery where isolation, chance, and hidden motives collide in a frozen landscape. Set against a relentless winter, this story draws you into a world of suspense, quiet danger, and unanswered questions. Sit back, listen closely, and let the mystery unfold.
Secrets in the Snow by Jefferson Farjeon. The Christmas Eve. Motor coach stopped in the middle of nowhere. Rubbing steam from her window, Janet looked out into a whirling white wilderness. She could not see any sign of town or village, and nobody got in and nobody got out, saving the conductor, who had vanished the moment the coach had come to a halt. "Is anything wrong?" she asked the untalkative man next to her. For 2 hours, this man had taken no advantage of the fact that, at a season of easy comradeship, he had been sitting beside an exceptionally pretty girl. "Don't know. Can't say," he answered shortly. "I'm betting it's a jolly old snowdrift," exclaimed the more loquacious young man in the seat behind. He had been doing his best to cheer a woman with a toothache and had failed signally. "Any takers?" The bet was not accepted, which was a misfortune for him, since his guess proved accurate. In a short while, the conductor returned with a gloomy face to report that the road was blocked. "There's snowdrifts as big as St. Paul's," he added. "Got to go back for help." The untalkative man jumped up. "That doesn't suit me," he grunted. "I was getting out at the next stop anyway." "So was I," said Janet. "You're not going to West Metten by any chance?" He hesitated, then murmured, "That direction," and the next moment was outside. "Well, wait a minute," exclaimed Janet, seizing her suitcase. "That's my direction, too." To her surprise, the loquacious passenger interposed. "I say, I wouldn't really," he urged, thrusting out his foot. "Why not?" she demanded, frowning at him. "Why not? Well, just look at the weather," he replied. "You'd better wait here. You'd never do it." "Thanks, but I've got a house party on," she retorted. "And I mean to do it. Do you mind moving your foot, or I'll lose my guide?" She stepped over the impeding boot, and a couple of seconds later was out in the blinding snow. For an instant, as the cold caught her and the flakes flung themselves into her face, she wondered whether the loquacious young man's advice had not been sound. Still, sound or not, she was not going back, and she plunged forward after a dim figure that was rapidly becoming obliterated. The figure moved as quickly as she, and it was not until she had increased her pace that she caught it up in a narrow lane. "You are in a hurry," she cried breathlessly. The pursued one turned, and his expression, a mixture of surprise and annoyance, was not complimentary. "You said you were going to West Metten," Janet explained. "So I thought we might walk together. I don't know the way." "I said I was going in that direction," the man corrected her. "But you didn't mention that you loathed company." "Don't worry, I'll keep behind," she shot back, incensed by his rudeness. He regarded her fixedly for a few seconds, as though sizing her up. Then he said in a slightly changed tone, "Let me advise you, young lady, to keep well behind. Otherwise, you may walk into more trouble than you've just come from." "Really? Really? What sort of trouble?" "Curiosity killed the cat." "Only I don't happen to be one." He smiled rather grimly and responded, after a moment's consideration, "Very well. I'm on a Scotland Yard job, and there may be some rough stuff coming along." He patted a side pocket suggestively. The weather chose this moment to create a diversion. A sudden wind drove a flurry of snow viciously into her eyes, and her suitcase slipped from her cold fingers. She stopped to regain it, stumbled, and took a soft fall. When she had picked herself up, she found herself alone. And policemen are supposed to be polite, she thought. Well, if I've lost my guide, I've still got his footprints. They ran down the virgin carpet of the lane till they were lost in the white, kaleidoscopic mist. She began to follow them, but stopped almost at once. "It's funny," she murmured. "Two sets of prints. Who are the others?" Both sets of prints were very recent. Of that there was no doubt. With fresh snow falling all the while, old marks soon ceased to be, and new marks had but a short life. Moreover, before she had overtaken the Scotland Yard man she had been following, only one set. Yes, but if that was so, she gave it up and hastened down the lane. The lane turned and twisted. The footprints became less and less distinct. That meant that those ahead of her were outpacing her, and that the length of time between the reaching and the making of the marks was increasing. They must be in a hurry, she reflected, as she accelerated. Presently, near a snow-covered barn, one set faded out completely. She had met nobody, and there were no signposts, so all she could do was to follow the remaining set and hope heaven would be kind to her. The joy of Christmas was fast oozing away. She was wet and shivery already. She regretted that she had not taken the advice of the idiotic young man. Yes, he had been idiotic. The scraps of conversation she had overheard behind her in the coach had, in Shakespearean terms, written him down an ass. Yet, as he had tried to dissuade her and had impudently stuck out his boot, there had been something not unpleasant in his ingenuous blue eyes. Perhaps, if a man were born a fool, he could not help it. She found herself walking mechanically. She had a sensation that if she stopped, she would stop for good. She was growing colder and colder. Her feet had become two lumps of squelching numbness, and tiny streams of chilly moisture were running down her neck. Then the worst happened. The last footprints faded out, and she reached a fork where the lane divided into two. Now, what? She asked herself. She tossed up in her mind, heads right. Tails left the imaginary coin, came down. Heads, and she took the right hand. Fork, walking became increasingly difficult. The lane narrowed to a snow-clothed track, once avoiding a big white mound. She trod deeply and sprawled into a ditch. Rose spluttering, rescued her suitcase and wondered whether to turn back. But now the blessed miracle for which she had prayed occurred a little way ahead, its roof just visible. Behind a high hedge was a cottage. She staggered towards it as a spent man stagers towards the oasis in the desert. The small gate in the hedge was closed, but the door of the house was open without hesitation. When her knock failed to produce any response, she walked. In the sight that met her gaze was as welcome as it was unexpected. On a small table by a smaller fire was a pot of tea. A sorceress cup was half filled with milk, less fluid. A chair near the table was at an untidy angle. and on the floor was a large bade, its metal moist. But if the last items were less welcome than the first, in that quick initial glance, the tea towered above everything. But for these frugal signs of a me, and the open front door, the house seemed unoccupied. It had a musty, closed-in smell, and dust was everywhere. Anybody at home, she called only her. Echo answered her. She walked to the table. The tea in the cup was still hot. The spade on the floor was still wet. She glanced towards a door. At the back of the room was a jar, about to call again. She paused. Her ears, grown acute through tension, had caught a sound on the other side of the door. At first, she could not decipher it. Then, as it was repeated with a sort of jerky regularity, she guessed what it was. It resembled the breathing of a short-winded ghost, but she did not believe in ghosts. "Are you coming in, or shall I come out?" she asked, adopting bold tactics. In a moment or two, the door moved and a head peered in cautiously. It was not a prepossessing head. Small, pale, with straw-colored hair, a flat nose and eyes that did not agree. It came around the door like a bad joke. For a few seconds, beauty and ugliness stared at each other, and then the heads inquired in a husky voice, "Who are you? My name won't interest you," answered Janet. "But my condition. May, if you've a heart, I'm cold and peeping, and I've lost my way." "Have you blinked the head? Yes, I've got art, but it ain't as strong. You gave me a proper scare. I'm sorry. May I know who you are?" "Me? Oh, caretaker." Now he entered completely from the look of his shabby suit. He did not earn a high salary for his job. I was just having a cup of tea. His eyes fixed themselves on the spade after doing a bit of snow shoveling. "Mike shot? See? I dropped the spade when I heard you coming. Did you think I was a ghost?" He smiled queerly. He was a horrid little fellow, but Janet found herself feeling rather sorry for him. "That's right, miss, being alone in an empty ass gives you the creeps. Especially at Christmas, that's right, ain't it?" He looked at her earnestly. "This ass is AED. I wouldn't recommend nobody to stay here at the present moment. I'm not in a mood to be particular," she pointed out. "Oh, see, where you trying to get to?" West Mertin never heard of it. He saw the astonishment in her eyes and added hastily, "See, I only been caretaker here a couple of days. You better ask someone else." "Thank you. Who?" He scratched his head. "Listen," she went on to her unsatisfactory host. "I don't want to trouble you, but I'm really in a frightful mess. If I can sit by your fire and dry myself for 10 minutes, and if you could let me have just one cup of tea from that pot, I'll give you a jolly good Christmas present." She produced from her sopping bag a dry 10-shilling note, and the caretaker's eyes gleamed. "And if you could add a towel," she said with sudden inspiration, "and could give me those 10 minutes to myself, I might turn this note into £1. 1! Oh, it's a go!" exclaimed the caretaker, and dived back into the kitchen. In a few moments he reappeared with an empty cup and a roller towel. "I found this hanging up. I hope it'll do," he said hoarsely. "The cup's clean and near." "Any chance of a drop of milk?" she asked. He shook his head. "Sugar." "Sorry, miss. See? I ain't started ordering things proper yet," he explained. And the bloke, "What engaged me didn't leave no stores, only the tea. But there's plenty of that in the pot, so out yourself, miss, and you can have half an hour if you like, while I goes on with me digging." He seized the spade and ran out of the room again. She heard his hurried footsteps fading away across a floor. She gazed after him with a little frown, trying to quell disturbing thoughts. Of course, it hasn't really been shopping weather lately, she reflected. But if you've been here for 2 days, Mr. Caretaker, have you been living entirely on teas? And whose ghost did you expect to walk in on you? Well, these things were nothing to do with her. Her own concern was to make good use of this half hour, and she proceeded to do so very thoroughly. Her first action was to lock the doors of the parlor to ensure privacy. Then she drew a blue check curtain across the window. The pale, subdued light gave her a comforting sense of peace, and the little fire coming into its own added to her pleasure. Secure against interruption, she took off her wet coat and slipped out of her dress, almost purring with pleasure, as the warmth of the fire caressed her bare arms. This is the moment for that tea. She thought she filled the empty cup, then sipped gingerly, minus milk. The tea was still too hot to go somewhere outside. She believed she heard the sound of shoveling, but she could not be sure. Where was he, at the back or front drawn? By idle curiosity, she began to move towards the window, but retreated quickly as her shadow fell upon the blue check curtain. She heard soft steps outside. He was in the front. "Well, I hope he's enjoying himself," she murmured. "It isn't my idea of fun," in her retreat. She had nearly stumbled over her suitcase on the floor, and the incident gave her a new idea, or elaborated a previous one. She opened the case, and after removing a top layer of gifts destined for Sunry folk at West Malone, if she ever reached them, she unpacked a complete change of lingerie. Then she stripped life, growing better and better, as she shared each damp garment. Naked, she laughed. The outrageous absurdity of her position swept over her, and she wondered what the absent house owner would have thought had he known of the use that was being made of his peror. Would he have been amused or indignant, pleased or annoyed? Well, he would never know. So why worry? She laughed again, then suddenly stood rigid. A sound she could not or would not interpret had broken. The velvet silence outside and frozen her laughter. She remained motionless, waiting for its repetition, when it was not repeated, and the only sound she could hear was the beating of her heart. She began diving into her clothes with desperate speed, striving to comfort herself as she dressed. Of course it wasn't. She thought it was an owl hooting, or some animal or other, or, yes, the whistle of a distant chain. That silly idiot talking about his precious ghost. He's given me the gym jams redressed. She unlocked the back door with definite distaste and called into the dim kitchen. "Are you in there?" As once before, her echo answered her. But this time it was a particularly unpleasant echo, repeating her question with ironic derision. Then she unlocked the front door and looked out into the gloaming dusk had come abruptly. It was a dusk choked with thick flakes. For a short space, she could see nothing but the snow falling as relentlessly as ever, and drowning the world beneath its dull white monotone. But presently, as she stared, shapes and outlines grew, and she made out the laden trees, the muffled bushes, and the boundary hedge. What she did not see was the little flat-noosed, pale-faced caretaker. Her mind, Fred Nervy, swinging inconsistently from one decision to another. I must find him. It ran, then recanted. Why should I find him? I can just go. I expect I'll come across somebody somewhere who'll direct me. And of course it was an owl. No, Janet, you don't think that. Stop playing tricks with yourself. You know, you can't go yet. Why, you haven't even paid him. I could leave the note on the table, couldn't I? Yes, why not? You know very well. Why not? She had just decided to brave the elements, this time not on her own behalf, when a figure came round the angle of the wall. At first, she thought it was the caretaker, and she breathed a sigh of relief. But then she realized that even the illusions of the snow could not have increased him to this size, and as the newcomer stopped abruptly and stared at her, she stared back in equal astonishment. It was the Scotland Yard detective. "Get back," he ordered sharply to ensure her obedience. He advanced and thrust her back unceremoniously into the room. Then he entered after her, glanced quickly around, and closed the door behind him. "How did you get here?" he demanded, her NSE nerves on edge. She was not in a mood for cross-examination, and she retorted, "How did you? You seem to be a very disobedient young lady." He frowned. "I think I advised you not to follow me, since I seem to have got here first," she returned. "I suppose you're quite sure you haven't followed me. And what right have you to call me disobedient? I'm not under your orders," he apologized impatiently. "Forgive me, but you'll recall I told you I was on a job, and perhaps if you're more polite I can help you with the job. I beg your pardon, you heard me. Let's start fresh. A few minutes ago, somebody gave a cry out there." "Are you sure?" he asked, sufficiently. "Didn't you hear it? We'll have your story first, if you don't mind. When did you hear the cry? 4 or 5 minutes ago? I can't say exactly. But you didn't go out." She flushed slightly as she recalled the reason, but she did not give the reason. She answered simply, "No." "Are you alone in here?" "Don't you think," she suggested, "it would be quicker if I told you my story in my own words? Unless it would be an even better idea to go out first and look for the trouble. There was a caretaker here when I arrived. He went out while I was trying to get dry. He hasn't come back." The detective hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. Will you wait here? If you don't want me to come with you, it wouldn't help, and there's no need to put you into unnecessary danger. Where did the cry seem to come from? Which direction?" "The back. Thank you, stay in this parlor. Don't move out of it," he added with a faint smile. "You don't mind being obedient this time?" "I don't mind being sensible," she replied. "I don't call that obedience." He turned to the door but paused with his hand on the knob for a couple of hours. "You and I sat side by side without saying a word," he remarked. "Since then, we've got to know each other quite well." Then he left her. She returned to the fire and finished her tea, but the comfort had gone out of it, and she found herself starting at shadows and eyeing the doors apprehensively. It would have helped if the detective had a more appealing personality. She wanted the fiction brand. Apparently, there was nothing appealing in the real thing. Romance, sentiment, even common politeness were lacking. She almost preferred the quaint little horror who had gone out into the snow with his spade and not come back again. The minutes, dragged by a grandfather clock on the wall, should have ticked them away. But it had stopped like everything else. But the snow. She had stopped herself. She ought to be traveling to West Melian, or moving about the gay and bustling house there, unpacking, chatting, laughing, or drinking tea with milk and sugar in it out of a delicate, expensive gut. Instead, she glanced around the musty, dusty parlor, now transferred from a sanctuary to a sort of prison. "I've had enough of this," she exclaimed, jumping up. "Suddenly, I'm going to have a look for myself." The front door opened and the detective returned. "Turned still here," he observed superfluously. "Just," she answered. "Did you find anything?" He shook his head. Then, "What's your solution?" she asked. "Quite a simple one." "I imagine," he said. "Let me have the rest of your story." She gave it to him briefly. He listened without interruption. When she had finished, she recalled one point she had forgotten to mention. "This just one more thing, Sheed. If it's important, you remember. You left me rather hurriedly after I'd carted you up from the motor coach." "I recall it," he admitted. "After you left me, I found 2 sets of footprints. I'm practically sure that before then there had only been one head your own. What about yours, excluding mine?" Of course, he stared at the fire for a few moments, then said, "Yes, you're right, and the whole thing fits. So here is my side of the story. I told you I was on a job. Your so-called caretaker was the job. I came to this neighborhood to track him. He broke prison a few days ago and had been reported in this locality. Just as you and I were talking in that lane, I spotted the fellow dashing by in effect. I've been chasing him ever since." "You mean he came here?" she exclaimed, obviously thinking himself safe. "He lit a fire and made himself some tea. Then you came in, gave him the shock of his life. Probably. He thought you were me." He posed. As a caretaker, played his cards carefully, and as soon as he got a chance, hopped it. Naturally, he extended those 10 minutes to half an hour. It gave him longer for his getaway. "I see," replied Janet slowly. "Yes, of course. Only, what that cry, you probably tripped and banged his nose. You don't bang your nose in soft snow? I've tried it myself. You may bang it against something else, or imagine you're going to. And if he was making his getaway, why didn't he do it at once? I've told you, he had to pose as the caretaker first, and make quite sure you weren't suspicious. He didn't want you following him. You haven't got me," she corrected him. "What I meant was, why didn't he make his getaway as soon as he left me? The last time, how do you know he didn't? Because that cry didn't come till quite a while afterwards. I'd begun to get dry, had some tea, gone to the front door to listen to those steps outside, returned, unpacked some things from my case. I'm sure it was quite 7 or 8 minutes. I see your point, answered the detective. It's a good, was livid. What are you doing here? She answered, astonished at the steadiness of her voice. And how do you explain that she did not have to point to the snow-covered shape on the ground? His gaze followed hers. I didn't tell you. I didn't want to frighten you, he rasped. He was digging, and he fell on his spade, cracking his skull. Why are you digging to find out why he was? What silly ideas have you got into your head? She faced his challenging eyes. Shall I tell you? Do you dare? He seized her wrist and held it cruelly. I suppose you're trying to impress me with your strength, she said with scorn in her voice. But isn't that a bit superfluous? You got a heavy spade and evidently know how to use it. She regretted her remark immediately afterwards, for in a sudden mad frenzy he raised the spade, and she knew it was not the first time he had raised it so that afternoon. But the next moment, the implement dropped harmlessly to the ground, and the man himself dropped too, with a shout of, "Pain! Put your hands up!" Benson said a quiet voice behind them. "Or the next one won't be in your foot." Janet turned weakly. It was the Laqua young man from the coach. The man on the ground glared helplessly, then eyed the order. As the newcomer advanced, a pair of handcuffs clicked. After that, the young man stooped to the mound, brushed aside some of the snow, and stared for a long while at what lay beneath. "I see you got Smith," he murmured. "That damn double-crosser," muttered. "Benson, you talked too much, eh? Before he was let out. Smart, aren't you? And so you broke prison to try and race him to the spot. And you were the AL. So, Ran, sneered Benson, who nevertheless appears to have won the race. The young man pointed out, "Well, Benson, let's have it. Which have you dug up the necklace you buried before you were caught for the West Metten robbery? You or Smith?" Benson moistened his dry lips. "I didn't talk then," he growled, "and I'm not talking now. No. Well, I don't expect it matters. The reason I didn't settle you in the coach was because I wanted you first to lead me all the way. And the only mistake I made," he added, turning to Janet for a moment, "was to show myself too soon in that lane. When you were talking to him. You remember, I tried to dissuade you from following him, didn't I?" "You did," she answered. "I suppose it was you who caused him to vanish so suddenly, and who made that second set of footprints." "Yes, when I vanished after him," smiled the young man, "but he was too quick for me. That time lost him for half an hour." Addressing Benson again now, without the smile, he went on, "Come along. I gather you've been busy a little way off. Let's see what you've been up to, or got down to picking up the spade." He forced the unwilling Benson to the spot where he had been digging. Janet followed them slowly, reaching them just as the young man gave an exclamation. He stooped and picked a long string of pearls from the snow. "Cleared earth. May I have it, please?" she asked. The young man turned and stared at her. Even the handcuff they forgot for a moment, the injured foot he was nursing. "I'm spending Christmas at the house where that robbery occurred," she explained, "and I'd rather like to give my hostess her necklace as a present." But the young man, after looking at her oddly, shook his head and became unprofessionally human. For 2 hours, he said, I have had the tantalizing experience of sitting behind the back of your head. If you don't mind, I think I'll give your hostess her necklace myself tomorrow morning, using it as the means to a frontal introduction. The unprofessional moment passed, he added, gravely. Meanwhile, since the snow is stopping, perhaps you'd better continue with your pleasure while I continue with my business. As Janet resumed her way, this time in the right direction, by all the laws of logic, she should have been thinking of an extremely interesting young man with whom, on the tomorrow, she was to renew her acquaintance. Instead, she found herself dwelling on a mound of snow and a miserable, pathetic little fellow with a squint, for whom no morrow would. So that was Secrets in the Snow, written by J. Jefferson Farjeon. If this journey through intrigue, hidden motives, and understated suspense kept you listening, stay with Audiobook for more classic detective tales, timeless crime stories, and forgotten literary gems that deserve a new audience. Your support helps preserve and share these powerful stories with listeners around the world. Subscribe. Explore our other audiobooks and return whenever you crave atmosphere, mystery, and storytelling that lingers long after the final word.